In this clip, we're going to begin to put all the pieces together by running through a complete activation cycle, in this case for the 2nd Brigade of the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division. The Warsaw Pact player has just completed the activation cycle for the 39th Guards Motor Rifle Division. As part of that, the 15th Guards Tank Regiment has launched a hasty attack on an American tank unit in this hex. The attack has successfully forced the American unit back a hex and also cost it a step. The Soviets didn't get off too easily either. The 9 steps in the regiment has now been reduced to 6 steps. The Warsaw Pact player advanced into the objective hex, then engaged the U.S. tank unit and flipped it over to its used side. At the end of that activation cycle, the initiative passed to the NATO player, and the NATO player now declares that he is activating the 2nd Brigade. The next segment that occurs in the activation cycle is the reconnaissance segment. The NATO player has a reconnaissance point in his brigade headquarters, and he uses it to attempt to make a reconnaissance attempt in this hex. So he expends his point, names this unit as the spotter. The range is 2 to 3 to this hex. The target is in light woods. That makes the acquisition value a 4. The NATO player rolls the die. He rolls a 7, so he has acquired this unit. That ends his reconnaissance segment. In the ensuing strike segment, the NATO player decides that he will launch a strike against first this hex here. So he makes a fire call from his brigade headquarters, and that fire call will go to this artillery unit here, this artillery unit here, and to a helicopter unit in the NATO player's ready box. So the NATO player brings that helicopter unit on the map and maneuvers it through a path of any hexes until it gets within flak range of the target. So the Soviet player declares that he has 1 flak point at that range. He rolls the die. He rolls an 8. That becomes a 9 after the flak point is added in. 9 misses. The NATO player declines to move his helicopter unit any further, and so shoots from a standoff range. The attack is launched with 12 from this unit, also 12 from this unit, so that's 24, and then 18 from this unit. 24 and 18 is 42, which becomes 21 after the standard division by 2. The NATO player consults the CRT, rolls the die, and receives a 6, which means that the hit modifier is 0, and so 21 hits are actually inflicted. The adjusted defense strength of this unit is a 7, and so 21 hits is just exactly what the NATO player needed to eliminate all of the steps in that hex. The attack helicopter unit returns to the recovery box, and the 2 artillery units that participated receive a fired marker. That's the end of that strike. Next, the NATO player declares that he is making a fire call from his brigade headquarters for an off-map air unit, and he is expending 3 air points to make this air call. The NATO player refers to the air call table and rolls, and he rolls a 3. This gives him an Alpha Jet air unit with 3 steps matching the 3 air points that he expended. The NATO player decides that he is going to come in for a low-altitude bombing mission. The Warsaw Pact player declares that he's got a flak strength of 1. He actually has 4/3 because the engineer here is also in range, but that rounds down to 1. He rolls a die. He rolls a 2, which becomes a 3. That misses. The Alpha Jets bomb in return. The Alpha Jets have a basic fire strength of 12, 4 times 3 steps. That is not modified. So 12 becomes 6. The NATO player rolls an 8. Those 6 hits become 7. That is exactly what the NATO player needed to eliminate 1 step, and the remaining steps are now disrupted because the number of hits that were inflicted were equal to or greater than their adjusted defense strength. The Alpha Jet unit flies off the map, never to be seen again. And that is the end of the strike segment. Play next proceeds to the operations segment, where the NATO player can start conducting operations. The first thing that the NATO player decides to do is to conduct a march operation and moves this unit here. The next thing that he decides to do is to conduct a hasty attack operation. He forms a task force. He expends a command point from his division main HQ off screen to assign the task force to the operation. The NATO player declares that the objective hex for his hasty attack is here, and he moves this battalion 1, 2, and 3 into this hex. The Warsaw Pact player gets defensive fire. He has a basic fire strength of 5 times 2, or 10. This is halved to 5 because he is disrupted, and then halved again by the standard division by 2 to a net of 2. There is no way that a 2 will do anything more than scratch the paint on this unit, because the Abrams have a adjusted defense strength of 10, so the Warsaw Pact player doesn't even bother to roll, since his DAG, the only unit that might be able to intervene, has already fired in the division's previous activation cycle. So now the NATO player gets offensive fire. This attack has a basic fire strength of 36, which becomes 18 after the standard division by 2. The NATO player is very unfortunate and rolls a 1, so his 18 drops to 15, but the defense strength of these Soviet tanks is just a 7, and because it's disrupted, the unit cannot retreat, which means it must absorb 14 hits by losing 2 steps, which eliminates the unit, leaving 1 hit still unabsorbed. The NATO unit is now eligible to advance in. The NATO player has an unused tank unit, so he places it in this hex and advances it in, leaving this unit as a dummy. That concludes the operation. The units that participated are flipped. The lead unit is removed. For his next operation, the NATO player decides that he will close up this hole here with a march operation. And at this point, he declares that his operation segment has been completed. Play now proceeds to the bridge demolition segment. The NATO player notes that there are Soviet units approaching this bridge, so he takes advantage of his ability to blow that bridge by set charges. He refers to the bridge demolition table, which tells him that he can blow this bridge on any die roll except a 1. He rolls a 3, that blows the bridge. So he places a blown bridge marker there, and that blows the bridge. The next segment in the activation cycle is the contamination segment. If there were a NATO unit located in a hex in a gas zone, then it would have to make a contamination check. However, chemical weapons have not been used so far in this scenario, so there is no contamination segment to execute. Finally, if there were any acquisition markers remaining on the map, those acquisition markers would be removed during the intelligence fade segment. And that ends the last segment in the activation cycle that applies to a game being played in open mode as opposed to hidden mode. So the activation cycle is now complete, and the NATO player passes the initiative back to the Warsaw Pact player.